Start. Okay, so I'm going to answer that question and how this works in the development area. So my name is Marinel. I'm really happy to be here and share the work I've done so far with my organizations. I used to be a human rights lawyer for 15 years from Washington, D.C. And I'm really excited to hear the IDG because this is the first time I'm hearing it. I think it's very important. I'm a supporter of internal transformation as a tool to create changes. And that's exactly, I think, what I'm going to be sharing with all of you is that that's why you see a photo of me. So I want you to understand how internal transformation can actually drive your work in the tourism industry and create impact. In the end, I realize it's so important, especially for someone like me. And I just want to give you a background. I'm Filipina, born in the Philippines, moved to the US as a first generation immigrant at the age of 13. I worked really hard to become a lawyer and became a lawyer and quit my job as a lawyer in 2017 to run my organizations simply because I fell in love with the mountains. Therefore, we're looking at Gal Trekker. That's the internal transformation. There's a lot to that story, but I'll just leave it at that, from a lawyer to a mountain nomad. And from that experience of taking people all over the world as a hobby, I saw the inequities on the ground with tourism. And as you can see, I'm a person of color and I'm a woman. I have a colonized indigenous identity. And so to me, what's closest to my heart is really talking about the voices of women and the indigenous people. And the reason is because for the almost 20 years that I've been a tourist, I see so much cognitive dissonance and disconnect with the tourism industry and how they try to include people that look like me. So this is a very personal mission above and beyond just a professional transition from being a lawyer to a tourism professional. And so for that reason, I ended up creating three organizations. Besides Gal Trekker, which is my travel media site, I talk about issues, I write about travel and outdoors. I have Equity Global Tracks. And it took me a few years to understand what is it that I really want to create impact on. There are three pillars. One is women focus, second, workforce equity, and third is community led. And I just want to explain what Port of Voice Collective is because they all go hand in hand. Port of Voice Collective is the one that I organized recently in 2019 to elevate the human rights of the mountain expedition workers, the porters who are carrying your bags on Inca Trail, the Himalayas, and Kilimanjaro. And these three organizations pretty much are rooted in the idea of creating a new kind of industry, which actually focuses on two things: inclusion and equity. And I'm going to have to tell you, it's very hard to transition from the internal IDG to SDG because the system in place can be very difficult to work with if you want to change the system. But I do want to focus on the fact that the work that I do focuses on a few SDGs: gender equality, equality in education, economic, decent work, and of course, partnerships with the local communities. I want to just give you an example of what has been done with the work we've been doing with equity and inclusion, specifically the work I've done in Mongolia. Because Vega English and Nomadic Culture Camp is actually born out of firsthand experiences being stranded in Mongolia for 294 days. I did not intend to create this initiative at all. If there is such thing as human to human, it's probably the most human to human I've ever done in terms of creating an idea, then turn it into a reality. And so I got stuck there, spend a lot of time getting to know the nomads. If you're not familiar with Mongolia, in the western side of Mongolia, it's quite remote. That's where you will find the eagle hunting nomadic Kazakh community. I spent months there teaching English to the kids, including Aymodir, who you see here. She was only 10, and she's like winning the eagle hunting competition every year. This is Baha, who's my co-founder. She is an English teacher, the one and only, and also the one and only English guide or speaking guide in the community of Sagsai, which is 5,000 person. So the story started out over milk tea every night, where Baha would tell me her story about her vision for the tourism for her community. She wanted it to be more immersed. So we created a 30-day program, which actually was activated thanks to the social entrepreneurship competition in tourism, which I know some of you are part of it, one of the speakers as well. Because of the 2021 competition, this idea of creating a 30-day cultural immersion program came to reality in 2022. And so this was backed up by a number of organizations, as you can see. We were mentored by SINA for months. And lo and behold, we got clients booking. By 2022, we launched a pilot. We taught 50 students, ranging from the age of 6 to about 17. And so they spent 30 days learning English from the tourists that came to the community, and the tourists funded the classes, which we had about 4 classes with 10 students, 10 to 12 students each. So the whole idea of English learning is to use it to preserve the culture. Now that sounds like a conundrum if you think about it, and in fact it's always the hardest thing I have to figure out in this project, because as a woman, a color, and someone who is an immigrant, I understand the value of English because it got me all the way to becoming a lawyer. But at the same time, because of my colonized identity, I know what it means to lose your culture. So to me, this is very, very so resonating for me. Every time I go to Mongolia, I'm so careful that the students, although they dream about coming to America and dream about doing all these things that are very modern, I always want to instill upon them that you have to cultivate that culture. You have to preserve it. And how we do it is basically use English teaching, believe it or not, to actually add value to the culture. Because what's happening is the community is seeing that tourists are coming, and the only way to communicate is through English. And what's the most interesting that tourists want to hear about? Eagle hunting, nomadic culture. So as long as we create value in that community of why culture matters, we believe even with English coming into the community that this is actually a tool, not a hindrance to preserving culture. So we'll wait to see how it goes. But so far, we've actually been recognized even this year and last year. We won the storytelling competition with GLP. We actually got recognized by Training Aid as a case model for community led. And then we also even got funding to finally build our Kuzbeki Museum and English Library this year. So I think there's something here, obviously, that started out around milk tea that Baha and I created. So I want to just show you the reasons why this project is quite different. First of all, I never called this project community based. I don't think it should be community based. The reason why is because this is community led. It's important to recognize leadership where they lie, because if we continue to say community based, there's an argument to be made that it's you're going to ask the question, who is leading, who is making those decisions, where is the power dynamics? Because oftentimes in the tourism industry, a lot of the money they actually get out of the country, and the outsiders like me will benefit more than the locals. So I was very deliberate in making sure that this is coming from the community, the very beginning of it, the origin, the vision, the execution. We have to ask ourselves, whose idea is it? And to me, that really mattered. I would never say it's my idea, it's Baha and the eagle hunting community's idea. And that, in a way, will define my role as an outsider. And I think as tourism professional, that is something we need to start thinking about as part of the IDG, the transformation within. Who are we in this profession? What is really our role? What are we doing in the first place? Are we really elevating the communities, especially when you want to work in the community tourism area? So it's a very fragile space, and it begs the question of who we are in this space. I really believe that we need to do an introspection on that. And so because I did that, I realized that we need to acknowledge the leadership of the community, because for a long time, a lot of the indigenous community, from what I've seen, have been hiding in the shadows. I don't know if you're familiar with white labeling, but that is still a practice in tourism. Why are we still doing that? Because if there is an indigenous community behind this initiative or product, then why are they not in the forefront? Why are we hiding those names, those people, the culture? Who's the leader behind it, really? And then also, it creates investment from the community. It creates this design from them directly, and there's ownership as a result. So I also want to note that one of the best practices about community-led tourism, being community-led, we need to let it live itself out. We cannot control it or cookie cutter it. It evolves because communities evolve, right? If it doesn't evolve, then you got to question, is this really community-led, or is it just another product that we created? And I got to give you a big example of what a product looks like. It's like the Inca Trail of Peru. I don't know if you're familiar with the 4-day classic Inca Trail, but I'm going to touch upon that as sort of the contrast to this whole thing, where There is a community of Quechua people on that Inca Trail tourism initiative, but their voices are not at all involved. Their leadership is not involved. There's no investment. There's no recognition of the Quechua community. Um, but this is, in a way, how I think we should move forward with best practices. I do want to connect to this point of women-led as well, because Kazbegi English is also a very women-led initiative. I want to say that every community has female leaders. We tend to forget that, and we shouldn't. We need to be deliberate looking for the women, because if we don't, then they're going to just slip, just like how they're slipping through the cracks right now. And that's something I personally observed in the industry. And then we need to understand also what is the gender dynamics and the level of equality in the community, because we need to also understand where the community is coming from and meet them where they are, not impose upon them our westernized version of equality, but to listen to where they are and figure out if there's a way to create a compromise or something that will elevate the women. And then at the same time, you foster female leadership by identifying the women, let them lead the way to create that change. And of course, don't forget about the men. They become one of the, honestly, we may forget about them, especially when I'm doing my work, but I always, in the end, I realize, no, we need the men. They need to buy into the idea, because after all, it's inclusion that we're trying to go for. It's not exclusion. And to be inclusive doesn't mean that you go for women and neglect the men in the process. And then at the end, you have to ask yourself, is this project at a point in time where we can break the norms and safely do so? Is there enough momentum and allyship in the community? Are they saying yes? Because by the end of the day, you have to listen to the community as to what they really want. I've been in communities in Egypt and the Middle East where it's really just not the right time to go for gender equality.
Marinel,
For
you have 2 minutes to
Great, thank
thank
you.
you.
And so we do have to ask that question, is it the right time? Because not every community is ready for change. And finally, ask yourself, are you the right person? And again, self-introspection comes into play. Because if we're only spending 1 week in Mongolia with the Kazakh nomads, you might want to reconsider whether you're the right person, because it's so complex to understand cultures. Eagle hunting is a very complex ancient culture. If you're just spending 1 week with them, maybe you need more time to spend with them before you create an initiative. And finally, I mentioned the porters on Inca Trail. I do want to say, and I want to make a note, not every voice wants the same kind of thing or goal. In Mongolia, they were very progressive. Women were already leaders. In Peru, when I was working on the Inca Trail, trying to identify the porters and changing the industry to make it more equitable, I couldn't find women at all. They were much, much behind with gender equity, much, much behind with basic human rights. So when you ask porters and catch community on the Inca Trail, working on the Inca Trail, they say we want basic rights, fair pay, decent work, treated well, not carry too much weight, overweight bags. We just want to be treated fairly. So at the end, this is just the only thing I want to focus on. I know there's a lot that I mentioned, but three things. When we do community led, let's think about access, because we're all privileged as tourism professionals. Let's think about local centric, not Western centric. And then the visibility of women and indigenous communities. How can we do all these three things as, as change makers in the industry? And just finally, I mentioned KM82 and the workforce equity. We are doing an advanced screening May 25th to June 8th. So if you want to see the film and learn more about the Inca Trail Porters, you can subscribe to the portervoicecollective.org. And that's it.